Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is. In the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitement and gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it. Because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. A quote from Frederick Buechner. When I was younger, I used to tell people that I was on a pursuit of the truth. And I felt really cool when I said it. This guy's on a pursuit of truth. In practice, it looked like dabbling in Buddhist mindfulness and sleeping in on Sundays. It didn't take much to impress my 19-year-old self. Mostly I was glad to have the moral high ground. I had shed the sophistry of my parents' faith some number of years ago, because what kind of loving God could let evil exist in the world? What kind of benevolent creator would let my parents get divorced? What kind of friend of sinners would have let me feel so lonely and so lost? I think it was the fear of death that was the hardest part. Growing up, I was washed with a sort of delusional bliss whenever I thought about eternal things. And now it seemed like existential dread was never far from my mind. This was especially true on the toilet. I don't know why it was always on the toilet. I wish I did. Maybe it's the place where we all feel most human. I would lose myself in this sort of dissociative loop, thinking over and over again, is this all that there is? Time ceased to have meaning. The moment would pass, and I would snap back to reality. I felt like an animal. And I was acting like one too. My tongue was no longer restrained by the vague moral code that had once stayed it. It turned rougher by the day, cord like a whip. And it was a weapon that I was all too skilled at wielding. For self-defense, a quick-witted response to diffuse even the threat of unkindness, and this turned into preemptive attacks. And I was prone to shots across the bow, the kind of unsolicited honesty that one can use as a cheap excuse for cruelty. Growing up, I had believed a lie, and it was sold to me by the overblown youth leader testimonies, the miraculous-sounding stories I'd seen play out on screen, and their message was that unbelief would leave you empty. But I hated God, and I was full. I had friends who were like family, plans every Friday night, and enough pride to semi-seriously joke about a 2032 presidential run. I had disdain for the guilt and shame religion propagated. I had the compassionate and thus correct political views. Communism has never been truly tried. I was full. I used to go to the library and walk through the aisles and aisles of books, thinking of all the millions of thoughts and thinkers who resided on the shelves. Most were dead. So many names, faces, lives snuffed out like a light. And there were only the chosen few who only had written enough words who an editor had said yes to. A billion others were the grass I crossed to get to class on time. Reality, like the moon, I learned, is a harsh mistress. I was full, yes, but more than that, I was afraid of being empty. I clung to the opinions of others to cobble together a sense of self. I non-ironically made my yearbook quote Winston Churchill's, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." My pursuit of truth, for all its use as a deflector of religious interrogation, was in some measure genuine. I really did want to live with certainty, but it was always more of a catchphrase than a path, and so it came as a surprise to me when I began to walk it. I met God running in Memphis, Tennessee, and it was the last week of the hardest job of my life. Service brings out the worst in me, and I had been staring at my ugly heart for a whole summer. I went running because one of the boys that I worked with had attempted suicide and been hospitalized. I was leaving at the end of the week, and I wouldn't get to say goodbye to him. I was running, and I was angry at the sky, and I was angry at God. I was angry at a world that would birth a boy who pounded his fists against the wall for frustration, who bloodied his knuckles to feel something, that he would go to such lengths to never feel anything again. And it was late, and I ran without a pace. I've always found it harder to feel mad, sad, bad when I'm out of breath. And still the ping-pong recriminations didn't stop. They were angry and incoherent, but they had a direction. After a while, I was walking and gasping and talking to God. I was out of breath and cursing him, and whether he existed or not didn't seem important. There was a boy who had tried to hang himself, and I needed someone to be responsible. I was startled by the dialogue. I hadn't tried to talk to God since the hollow prayers of a boy who didn't want to go to hell for masturbating. I was startled by the stars that seemed in some way an answer. No miracle came. No voice boomed from heaven to answer me in my grief. But I had silence and a sense. Now, I don't want to embellish what happened. I had a dialogue, one-sided as it was, and that was it. But somehow it was enough. Enough for me to get on a plane to Pittsburgh and sit in a pew that Sunday. Enough for me to say that I had been heard by a God who lived. Enough for me to say that since that night running in Memphis, that he's answered me, that he's heard my prayers, he knows my name. He has answered me with winks. Coincidences, oddities, confirmation bias, at least my skepticism says, but enough flashes, enough glimpses to just barely make out the face of God. It was to my surprise and more dismay than I'd care to admit that one day I was walking in a bookstore and saw Mr. Squire D. Rushnell's When God Winks. Ecclesiastes is prescient. There's nothing new under the sun, and I'm not that original of a thinker to have dubbed the idea myself. But the concept still has a special meaning to me, and I imagine that Mr. Rushnell does a fine job elucidating the magical feeling of a holy moment in ordinary time, but I haven't read his book yet. There's something that's deeply personal to me about straining for signs of the Almighty in my daily life, but I think that these moments are meant to be shared. Now, I've written some of these reflections online on a blog called Winks from On High, and they exist there for people to be able to read what God has done in my life, from a simple run in Memphis, from the angry prayers of a man who didn't believe. And I hope to share with you now these reflections read out loud and the other things that God shows and tells me that I should tell you. I'm not a charismatic, I'm not a showy person by nature, but I do think that these are important and that they might be able to help you, that maybe God could speak to you through them. When I was confirmed as an Anglican, I'm a Catholic now, but still, it was an important day. I stood in line as the bishop laid hands on each of my brothers and sisters. And after it was my turn to be prayed over, I returned to my spot in line. My direct eyesight was towards the high altar, and through the flame of the gospel candle, I saw the golden cross shimmering and moving in the light. and it looked alive. I smiled to myself. This has been the virtue of my walk of faith, that I could choose to see this beauty and this sign as a coincidence, a happenstance, or as the actual presence of Jesus Christ. And by the grace of God, I choose the latter. God bless you, friends. Grace to you and peace.